Hi, good day. So, as the title of this video suggests, today we are going to be discussing about psychoanalytic criticism. So, to provide a brief description, psychoanalytic criticism is, as the name suggests, is the approach of literary criticism that adopts the methods of reading as employed by Freud and other later theorists. And by Freud here, we mean Sigmund Freud, the pioneer psychoanalyst, which we will also discuss in a few. And this approach requires us to discuss Freud's theory in some degree of detail to help us grasp a picture of psychoanalytic criticism as an approach of examining works in terms of literature and art. So, this approach argues that text, like dreams, express the secret unconscious desires and anxieties of the author. The literary work produced by an author is a manifestation of his own neurosis. With that in mind, one may psychoanalyze a character found in a story within a literary work, whether the character be antagonist or protagonist or even just a simple commoner found in the story. But all characters are projections of the author's psyche. So it doesn't matter if it's the antagonist or the protagonist, but usually it's those two, right? Because they perform heavier roles in stories. But regardless of the character, usually all such characters are projections of the author's psyche. So next is we have, like psychoanalysis, or where this theory is rooted from, this approach seeks evidence of unresolved emotions, psychological conflicts, and guilts that break the harmony of a literary work. So when we say that break the harmony of a literary work, we are referring to the deviations from norms or those we consider are inappropriate in terms of a society or a culture. So the author's own childhood traumas, family life, sexual conflicts, and fixations may be reflected within the behavior of the characters in a piece. So, however, these are expressed indirectly rather than directly. These are disguised and encoded. So this is where the analogy of dreams come from. So just like dreams, they are indirect, disguised, and encoded. And these are shown through symbolism, condensation, and displacement. So, psychoanalytic criticism concerns itself with what the author never intended. So, if we compare that to other criticisms, of course, we are going to analyze texts according to what the author means. However, this one is different because it's going to examine the text. We take the text and the author's life side by side, and then we examine what the author didn't explicitly intend in his piece, but that we can somehow grasp or somehow understand that maybe these are projections from the author's own life. So, the questions that they usually ask are, what are the family dynamics observed in the piece? What do they reveal? How does repression affect the unconscious motives of the characters? What core issues surface according to the repressions? And because of course when you repress an emotion, of course these are going to surface later on. So that is also one of the questions that they are going to ask. And then, what does a character's behavior, such as regression, projection, fear of death, and sexuality imply? So all these kinds of complex concepts are going to be discussed in psychoanalytic criticism. This all started in the 1920s when Sigmund Freud, the psychoanalysis pioneer, it was developed by him. So it used to be a means of analysis and therapy for neurosis, but like other fields like philosophy, it expanded to other fields as well, such as literature and art. So this approach emerged in the early decades of the 19th century, 1920s to be exact, as part of the romantic replacement of earlier mimetic and pragmatic views on the nature of literature. So if you remember, these mimetic views were once started by Plato and Aristotle. Now, in his book Introduction to Psychoanalysis, published in 1920, Freud commented on the workings of the artist's imagination. He said, literature and other arts, like dreams and neurotic symptoms, note neurotic symptoms, consist of the imagined or fantasied fulfillment of wishes that are either denied by reality or prohibited by social standards of morality and propriety. So, meaning, in similar terms, an artist's or a writer's piece reflects their impossible or socially unaccepted desire. So, whether it be considered by society as inappropriate, or that it doesn't what do you call that? It doesn't conform to a standard. Usually, those are what we consider as deviations, right? So, that means that if a writer or an artist wants to deviate, then of course he has the choice to do it through his or her piece or work of art. So these forbidden, mainly sexual libidinal desires come into conflict with the censor, which also represses it back to the unconscious mind of the artist or writer. So to simplify that, for example, we have here the unconscious mind. These libidinal desires comes from the unconscious mind. So let's paint a picture of the unconscious being here at the back, and then these surface into the front. However, because we have a censor of how society expects us to function as human beings, these libidinal desires, they are blocked by our censor, which we cannot let them out into the world, because if we do, of course, we will be painted deviant by the society. So these libidinal desires that wants to come out, we push them back to the unconscious mind. The censor is what reflects back, or what pushes back, these libidinal desires. Libidinal desires are fantasies deemed inappropriate or impossible by society. And the censor is the standard of society, which is internally held by a person. So we can also consider the censor as our consciousness, or as the part of us that holds what is moral or immoral. That is what decides which we project into the world. However, these are permitted by the censor in writing or arts to achieve a twisted form of satisfaction. Still, the real motives and objectives from the conscious mind are disguised through the following, which I have mentioned earlier: condensation, displacement, and symbolism. These libidinal desires are allowed by our censor to come through, or to reveal itself. However, this is only through literature or art. If this is only reflected in the piece, but not in the actual action, or not actually done by the writer himself or the artist. So let's discuss condensation, displacement, and symbolism. Condensation: some parts of the unconscious material is omitted and are fused with other unconscious elements into one unconscious desire. So from the word itself, condensed, the unconscious material, some of parts of the unconscious material is omitted. So like the unconscious decides, now, oh, we're not going to include this one, we're just going to include this one, and then it's merged into yet another unconscious element. So that there is kind of a mix up there, that the unconscious mind decides which to keep and not to keep, or which to condense into another unconscious thought. Now we proceed to displacement. Displacement is an unconscious object of desire is substituted by an acceptable one. So, and by acceptable we mean socially acceptable or socially appropriate, one that is considered okay by society. We proceed now to symbolism. So symbolism: the repressed, mainly sexual objects of desire are represented by non-sexual objects which resemble them, or which one can associate with them. So if we're really going to give examples, we take here, okay, the human phallus, the human penis. Of course, it's very common that we use emojis in daily life, and then these symbols let's put that the sexual object of desire is the phallus. We replace it then with the emoji of an eggplant or other similar looking emojis. So that is a literal example. The disguised fantasies that are evident to consciousness are called by Freud the manifests. The manifest is the desires that are conscious to the person. And then the unconscious wishes is what he calls the latent content. So, simply put, manifest is the obvious meaning, or which is known by the conscious, or which we are conscious of. And then latent is what has hidden meaning, or what we are unconscious of. So that is the difference between manifest and latent. However, according to Freud, it also present in the unconscious mind of a person are the residual traces of the prior stages of psychosexual development from early infancy and forward. These may have been outgrown by the person, but they remain an unconscious fixation in the adult stage. So, according to Freud, any person or artist or not has unconscious fixations which reveals itself later in life. Let's discuss the psychosexual stages first to understand the fixations. Now we have, if you can remember, we have the oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital stages, right? So oral comes from birth to 12 months. The infant's pleasure is centered on the mouth, or for example, a child sucks, and then that sounds wrong. A child is sucking the toys, or usually he puts his toys in his mouth because that is where pleasure is coming from, according to Freud. And then we have next is the anal stage, which starts from 1 to 3 years of age. And then the child's pleasure is said to be focused on the anus and from elimination or bowel elimination. And then we have the phallic next, 3 to 6 years. The child's pleasure falls on the genitals. So we have the two complex here. Let's introduce the two complex, which is the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex. So the Oedipus complex, developed by Freud, concerns a male child, and that main child is hostile towards a male parent, which is his father, because he feels an unconscious sexual attachment towards the female parent, which is the mother. Now, the Electra complex is the complete opposite of the Oedipus complex, wherein the female child is hostile towards the female parent, which is the mother, because the female child feels an unconscious sexual attachment towards her male parent, which is the father. However, this second complex, the Electra complex, is actually developed by Carl Jung in 1913, and it was not Sigmund Freud which developed the Electra complex. However, Sigmund Freud did in fact develop the Oedipus complex. So now we proceed to the latency stage, which is from 7 to 11 years. This is the stage wherein the child represses sexual interest and develops social and intellectual skills. So there is a pause, as it implies. There is a latency. There is a pause in the psychosexual development of the child. Now, the next stage is the genital stage, which is from puberty onwards. And Freud calls this the sexual reawakening. The source of sexual pleasure now comes from others. After reviewing the psychosexual stages, let us now proceed to the fixations that are, according to Freud, rooted from the psychosexual stages. When triggered by some later event in adult life, a repressed wish is revived and motivates a fantasy, in disguised form, of course, of a satisfaction that is modeled from the way it was gratified in the earlier psychosexual stages. However, needs that are not met in the psychosexual stages can also trigger fixations. For an example of the fixations in the oral stage, we have smoking, gum chewing, and nail biting. As we can remember, the pleasure is focused or centered on the mouth. So these acts of smoking, gum chewing, and nail biting somehow gratifies that need from the oral stage, right? However, maybe the person the person's needs were gratified or the person's needs were not met, and these two can trigger fixations. So it's not just because the needs were not met, but also if it was gratified, then it can also develop or grow into fixations. Now we have the fixations that is rooted in the anal stage. We have orderliness, obsession, and rigidity. Now, if you can remember, anal stage is where the pleasure of the child is centered on the anus and in elimination. So it's completely understandable that orderliness is a fixation because we are fixated on the elimination of mess, so we become very orderly. And the rigidity is when we do not, rigidity refers to when a person does not listen to others, or he is very rigid in his own opinions, seemingly only focusing on what he thinks is right. Now proceeding to the fixations which are rooted in the phallic stage, we have vanity, exhibitionism, and pride. So first we have vanity. Vanity, of course, is excessive pride or admiration in one's appearance or even achievement. So if one is very vain, we remember here that the phallic stage is centered on the child's genitals, right? However, this the child's genital can also be refer to his overall self. Now, vanity is the admiration of that. Now, exhibitionism, let's proceed to exhibitionism. It's a form of paraphilia, wherein usually exhibitionists expose their genitals to the public, usually to unsuspecting strangers, and become sexually excited when doing so. So, this pleasure that centers on the genitals is revealing itself later in life. So, that is why exhibitionism is an example of a fixation in the phallic stage. However, Freud also asserts that artists or writers possess special abilities that differentiate them radically from the neurotics. Because according to him, artists and writers have the power to shift their sexual desires to non-sexual ones. To further elaborate, the artistic person can shift instinctual desires from sexual goals to higher non-sexual goals. Example may be pursuing proficiency in their craft as an artist. They can elaborate their fantasies in a way that conceals or detaches their work from personal elements related to them. They are capable of satisfying the unconscious desires of other people than themselves. Simply put, artists or writers can make their work relatable, as if it is geared towards the general public or the desire of the general public and their satisfaction, and not a satisfaction of the artist's desire. So that is the power held by writers and artists, according to Freud. Now let's proceed to Freud's theories of mental structures. Freud developed models of mental structures. One of the most commonly known is the mind model, which he divided into three functional aspects, which we commonly know as the id, ego, and superego. As a review again, the id incorporates libidinal and other desires. The ego tries its best to negotiate the conflict by weighing reality, and the superego is the internalization of standards of morality and propriety. So, modeled from Freud, after Freud, we have Alfred Ernest Jones in the 1940s. A number of writers produced critical analysis modeled on the classical Freudian theory. One of the best-known books in this mode is Ernest Jones' Hamlet and Oedipus, published in 1949. Now, in his book, Jones explained Hamlet's inability to make up his mind to kill his uncle by reference of his Oedipus complex. That is, the repressed but continuing presence in the adult's unconscious of the male infant's desire to possess his mother and to have his rival, the father, out of the way. Freud derived this term, the Greek tragedy of Sophocles, which is titled Oedipus the King, whose protagonist has unknowingly killed his father and married his mother. So you understand that is where Oedipus complex stems from. Now, Jones proposes that Hamlet's conflict is an echo of a similar one in Shakespeare himself, because according to Jones, its popularity beyond centuries is a result of the repressed Oedipal conflict that is shared by all men. So that is according to Jones. Actually, that is the end of my discussion. So I will just include here the works that I have consulted. I consulted Michael Delahoy's Introduction to Literature, Psychoanalytic Criticism, and then Abrams, M.H., Psychological and Psychoanalytic Criticism, a glossary of literary terms. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you gained something. And if there is anything that I can further elaborate, please tell me, and I will maybe mention in the comments or reply in the comments. That's it.